Hello everyone and welcome to Skeletons of the Past podcast. I am your host Kayla, and today's episode we're going to be talking about the Lemp Mansion. Now, the Lemp Mansion here in St. Louis, I would say, is one of those things where I wanted to cover this actually as the first episode, solely because, let's be real, growing up here in Missouri, this is one of the most talked about haunted places in the United States, and so I wanted to put a little bit of my history, a little bit of who I am and where I come from into this channel. Now, keep in mind, we are not officially yet on iTunes or Spotify or all that good stuff yet, so we will be getting there to that point eventually in the future. What's going to be really cool about this podcast is just the sole fact that I love to insert pictures. I'm a very visual person, and when someone is telling me a story, I feel like sometimes it's hard for me to retain my attention. So if you're one of those people, you're gonna absolutely love me, because I love to throw in a lot of photos and pictures for this podcast and any of the videos that I do just in general. So if you're a visual learner, you'll be in for a treat with the amount of photos I'm about to input. But it's said to be, the Lemp Mansion is actually said to be one of the top 10 most haunted places in the United States. And that's pretty crazy, the biggest thing, like around Halloween time especially, of course, because it's paranormal and haunted, the radio station, I don't know if they still do it, but there's this guy named Dave Glover, and he went like every fall, or was it Stephen DC? I can't remember. One of the radio stations, basically what they would do with the host is they would host a question thing, and if you got the answers right that they would put on air, you got to be invited to a dinner at the Lemp Mansion for exclusively to those people, and then they got to go on a tour. And what happened is my mom, at a really young age, ended up going to the Lemp Mansion. She got to go on this tour. It was pretty awesome. And then they picked somebody at the very end to stay the night, and you have the chance to win, like, I think $1,000 in cash or something like that if you can complete all the tasks inside of the mansion. And they will call you on a cell phone, and your job is to literally run around the entire mansion and do whatever they're telling you to do. So it's one of those crazy attractions, but it's definitely very, very interesting. The reason why this mansion is so haunted is because there are so many deaths and suicides from people, and it just made so many headlines across the United States. But they continuously play this tragic host to all these events. So over the years, the mansion was transformed from the stately home of millionaires to office space, decaying into a rundown boarding house, and then it finally was restored into its current state as a fine diner, theater, restaurant, and bed and breakfast. So literally you can drive over. Specifically, I remember passing, like when we would always pass, like we would be going to my grandparents' house. They used to live in Illinois. So when you cross the Mississippi, right, to go over into Illinois, you pass the Lemp Mansion. I mean, you just go right up 55 and then you go over the bridge and it's right there. So I always loved driving by this house in the mysticism and just all these things that I always thought was like, what actually happened there? But you can go there and they have like an amazing dinner menu. I mean, you can check it out online. I can link all their stuff below, but they do weddings there. They do all kinds of stuff. So to this day, you can actually go and check out the Lemp Mansion. That being said, the Lemp family began with Johann Adam Lemp, who arrived in St. Louis from Eschwege, Germany in 1838. Building a small grocery store at what is now Delmar and 6th Streets, he sold common household items, groceries, and homemade beer. The light golden lager was a welcome change from the darker beers that were sold at the time. The recipe handed down by his father was so popular that just 2 years later, he gave up the grocery store and built a small brewery in 1840, at a point close to where the Gateway Arch stands today. So the Lemp family literally introduced the American lager to the United States, and this was just unheard of because you had all these dark German beers and things like that, but this beer was unlike anything else they had seen before. So Lemp sold his first beer in a pub attached to the brewery, introducing St. Louis to its first lager. But before long, Lemp found that the brewery was too small to handle both production and storage, and found a limestone cave south of the city limits. The cave, which was located at the present-day corner of Cherokee and Domino Place, could be kept cool by chopping ice from the nearby Mississippi River and depositing it inside, providing perfect conditions for the lagering process to run its course. Lemp's Western Brewing Company continued to prosper, and by the 1850s was one of the largest in the city, and to 1858, the beer captured first place at the annual St. Louis Fair. So, mind you, okay, so this guy basically Cherokee Street, this is what I'm thinking of when I read this, okay? So Cherokee Street is basically, it's kind of cool now, it's an artsier kind of hipster area, but it's in like the whole part of St. Louis where all this stuff is at. You don't run around with at least some kind of pepper spray or pocket knife. Like, these places are dangerous where all this stuff is located now. It's not like just a place that you're like, okay kids, go have fun, I'll see you later. So in my head I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, like this place is so dangerous now. But back in the day, St. Louis was like bumping. Like, I mean, they have all these old historic buildings that people are buying now to renovate and turn into something just completely amazing. And so anyway, to know that this is kind of the origins of where it first started for me, and you know, our culture here is just really interesting. And so like, what's cool too is that the World's Fair was held here, and obviously, you know, people would come to bring all their latest inventions. And I mean, like, ice cream was introduced at the World's Fair. Like, a lot of these things that we know now is like normal things, normal food, normal inventions, technologies, whatever. This was like cutting edge stuff. So every year at the World's Fair, wherever it was going to be held, people would bring those things to it. So it's only natural, I feel like, that the beer would have ended up just captivating everybody and was like, wow, this is great. And so it kind of just propelled him to be able to sell his lager like even further. So basically, Adam Lemp was a millionaire by the time of his death, and on August 25th, 1862, he actually passed away. And his son William began a major expansion of the brewery. He purchased a 5-block radius around the storage house on Cherokee, above the lagering caves, and in 1864, a new plant was completed at Cherokee Street and Carondelet Avenue. Continually expanding to meet product demand, the brewery eventually covered 5 city blocks. This thing was like huge. I mean, it's like not just like a little brewery. I mean, this thing was huge for the time at least. But by the 1870s, the Lemp family symbolized both wealth and power, as the Lemp Brewery controlled the St. Louis beer market, a position it maintained until Prohibition. In 1868, Jacob Fikert, William Lemp's father-in-law, built a house a short distance from the Lemp Brewery. In 1876, William Lemp purchased it for his family and utilizing it as both a residence and an auxiliary office. So this is what is known as actually the Lemp Mansion today. This is the thing that is, you can see, and it ended up being it was just like a smaller house that they basically built upon to meet the needs of whatever it was they were trying to do, and it ended up turning it into like a 33-bedroom house, which is like, that's massive alone. But I'm saying, like, if you eventually I plan on covering the Sarah Winchester mystery house on my channel here. That's crazy in itself. Like, Sarah Winchester, I believe, had over like 100 bedrooms in that house. So 33 is still quite large is what I'm trying to get at. And it just became like this like Victorian showplace for them to basically be like, look at all this money we have, because they're basically like millionaires at this point, right? Because they're making so much money off of, you know, the alcohol, off of all the beer and lager, everything. They had so much money, they didn't know what to do with it, so they just turned this into this amazing mansion. So like, in the middle of all the success that the family was having, this is where we start kind of getting into the deaths of the family members. So the Lemp family experienced the first of like many tragedies when it came to his oldest son, Frederick Lemp, William Sr.'s favorite son, by the way. He apparently had never been in really good health and always was having a lot of heart issues, and so he apparently died in 1901 at the age of 28 and died of heart failure. Then William kind of like just never was the same after that, and he became very like secluded. You know, he began this slow withdrawal of like being out in public. He was rarely ever seen in public after that. And he just kind of came and just disheveled and just was not himself anymore after his favorite son died. And so then, you know, fast forward, then in 1904, William's best friend, who is Frederick Pabst, you know, Pabst Blue Ribbon, also died, leaving William very indifferent and to the details of running the brewery. Though he arrived at the office each day, he was nervous and unsettled. His physical and mental health began to decline, and on February 13th, 1904, he shot himself in the head with a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson. So then in November of 1904, William Lemp Jr. took over as the new president of the William J. Lemp Brewing Company, and inheriting the family business and a vast fortune. So he has this huge fortune. And then he also has his wife named Lillian, and they also have a son together, okay? So Lillian is known for like wearing lavender and is like very extravagant when it comes to every kind of thing, right? Very into art, very into clothing, and just decorating the house because she wanted to make it like her place, you know? So she basically was filling the house with servants and huge amounts on carriages and clothing, because obviously cars are not a thing yet. So Lillian was known to be a very beautiful woman, and she came from a wealthy family herself. She and William Lemp Jr. had married in 1899, and William J. Lemp III was born on September 26, 1900. Long before Lillian became known as the Lady of Lavender, because of her fondness for the color, she, in addition to her lavender attire and accessories, went so far as to have her carriages, horse harnesses, and everything dyed lavender. In the beginning, Will enjoyed showing off his trophy wife, but Will was a player and born with a silver spoon in his mouth, and he was used to doing and acting as he pleased. But then basically William at one point was like really tired of his wife. He was just like, I'm so over you. Here is literally $1,000. He gave her $1,000 every day, and that was her ultimatum that if she didn't spend it, she wouldn't get any more. So he literally sent her on shopping sprees every single day just to get her out of the house, because Will was like, yo, I don't want anything to do with you. And he himself was having these like crazy parties and all these things going on the side, and she of course like knew about it. I mean, you can't be naive to think like, oh man, like my husband's not doing anything when he's telling me to literally go away and pays me $1,000 a day to just leave him alone. Like, that's just mind-blowing. So in the meantime, while this was going on, Will was busy running the brewery during the day and then pursuing all manners of decadent activities during the night. He was holding lavish parties. So you remember those caves where they were doing a lot of their lagering processes? Well, where the bowling alley, the alley is, the theater and all those different things, he was holding these huge parties and just giving free beer. So there's free flowing beer everywhere. It reminds me when I read of this of like The Great Gatsby, where there's scenes in the movie where it's just all these people are just getting drunk and they're having all these food and just half naked girls running around everywhere, and that's literally the life. He literally would hold all these parties, but then he would bring in numerous prostitutes for the entertainment of his friends. And then his friends who attended these lavish events were known to enjoy a high time in the earth below. Will's shenanigans, though, caught up to him because he ended up siring a son with a woman other than his wife. Today, there is no official documentation that this boy existed. However, the rumors that this boy was hidden in the mansion attic for his entire life have been prevalent over the years. And according to a St. Louis historian, there's this guy named Joe Gibbons. So when he was interviewed, a former nanny and a chauffeur who worked at the mansion long ago, both of them verified that the boy did exist and was housed in the attic quarters that also housed the servants' rooms. Spawned from Will's philandering with either one of the many prostitutes or mansion servant, the boy was born with Down syndrome. So this was like a really big shame, because not only did he like have an affair on his wife, which was like a big no-no back in the day, and when he found out about it, and he was obviously very public, because if you think about it, they didn't have cell phones at this point, they didn't have that kind of technology. So to find out that all of a sudden, not only did you knock up some other chick, but then on top of that, your kiddo has Down syndrome, it was kind of like this big shame thing. And he didn't want to be known as that. So from what all the records are kind of indicating in the encounters with people, it seems like that he was kind of just held away from like the sight of everybody else, other than the people who actually worked there and knew what was going on. So to him though, because he had Down syndrome, it was a total embarrassment to the family, and the boy was hidden away from the world in order to cloak the Lemp's family shame. Known today as the monkey face boy, that's what they called him, was the monkey face boy. This unfortunate soul continues to show his presence at the Lemp Mansion, which I mean rightfully so. If you're a human being, you're born with something that's completely out of your control, and then all of a sudden you're just like shoved in an attic, and of course there's gonna be that residual trauma that's left in the house, 100%. Really, William kind of just was tired of Lillian. He already had enough to deal with. He's dealing with basically a child that's he wed, sired out of wedlock, and then now you have Lillian, who he's just tired of feeding her cash all day to keep her out of sight. He's like, I'm done. And they filed for divorce in 1908. Why she didn't take this step with all of his ongoings or going-ons could be nothing more than a sign of the times, which is very true. The court proceedings surrounding the divorce, however, became a major St. Louis scandal, with four St. Louis newspapers devoting extensive front-page coverage to the messy affair. The trial opened in February 1909 to crowds that flocked the courthouse each day to witness the drama of the tales of violence, drunkenness, atheism, and cruelty. So it's very interesting, because you wouldn't normally hear people talk about religion when it comes to these different divorce things now. People don't normally talk about that, but religion was such a big cultural aspect back in the day that I'm not surprised that it was brought up a lot. But it's hard to think that, it's literally hard to think that Lillian had no idea about this other child. And the fact that she just let it go on for so long and she just didn't say anything, it really just, to me, shows that she just kind of went with it, because she's like, well, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna be a single mom with, a kid, and how am I gonna make rent, or how, those normal things. So I think she just let it go, and knowing that at least the child was taken care of and fed to her was enough for her conscience. But that being said, virtually ignoring William's decadent activities, Lillian almost lost custody of William Lemp III because of a photograph that was presented at the trial showing her smoking a cigarette. Can you believe that? Today, there's so many other issues going on, but yet the one thing that would get you to potentially lose your child is a cigarette? Okay. In the end, she retained custody of their son, but soon retired from the public eye. The only time she was ever seen wearing anything other than lavender was on the final day of her divorce proceedings, when she apparently appeared entirely in black before the judge. With the divorce, Will's troubles had only just begun, and in 1906, 9 of the large brewing companies in the St. Louis areas had combined to form the Independent Breweries Company, creating a fierce competition that the Lemp Brewery had never faced. In the same year, Will's mother died by cancer on April 16th. So you have four of the Lemp family members technically died. So you have Johann, who died first, then you had Frederick, and then you had Pabst, Frederick Pabst. He dies, and then William kills himself, and then now you have all this going on leading up to this, where you have these other brewing companies who basically are competing against each other, said, hey, let's take down this guy. There'll be more money and more beer for us to go around if we can basically get rid of these guys. And so that's what they did. They basically ganged up and tried to knock out the Lemp family and their brewery. So then Prohibition came along in 1919. The individual family members were already wealthy. So they basically found that there was little incentive to keep the brewery afloat for some time. William hoped that Congress would repeal Prohibition, but finally gave up and closed the Lemp plant down without notice. The workers learned of the closing when they came to work one day and just found the doors shut and the gates locked. No note, no nothing. Basically said, up, you don't have a job. So on March 20th, this is the next one, 1920, Elsa Lemp Wright, William's sister, the wealthy heiress in the St. Louis, she shot herself just like her father had done years before. Elsa was said to have been despondent over her rocky marriage that had happened. So then they started liquidating the assets of the plant, auctioning the buildings, and William Jr. sold the famous Lemp Falstaff logo to the brewer Joseph Griedsteck for $25,000 in 1922. The brewery buildings were sold to the International Shoe Company for $588,000, which is a fraction of its estimated worth of $7 million in the years before Prohibition. After the end of the Lemp brewing dynasty, William Jr. slipped into a depression, acting much like his father. So here we go, right? He's starting the same cycle, the same pattern. And it makes me wonder, just from seeing the history on this family, if there could have potentially been some form of mental health issues that ran in the family, because all of them had very similar symptoms once they started hitting around the same age. So, and especially depression. It seems like depression is one of the big ones that runs in families. Depression can be situational or it can be genetic. And so what happened was because he was acting so much like his father, he started becoming increasingly nervous, erratic, shunning public life, and often complaining of ill health. And then on December 29th, 1922, William shot himself in the heart with a .38 caliber revolver in the very same building where his father had died 18 years before. William II took his life on the main level of the mansion, just inside the entrance to the left. At the time of his death, the room served as his office. He was interred in the family mausoleum of Bellefontaine Cemetery in the crypt just above his sister Elsa. William's brothers Charles and Edwin, so these guys were a part of the situation, but they weren't, because they basically left to pursue other endeavors other than just the brewing company, which I'm proud that they chose to go a different avenue rather than, oh, it's just my brother doing my thing. So it seemed like the entire Lemp family empire kind of just died, or had finally ended, and Edwin had entered into a life of seclusion in his estate in Kirkwood, Missouri in 1911. Charles had never been involved in the brewery and had chosen to work in the banking and real estate fields instead. In 1943, yet another tragedy occurred when William Lemp III, William's the second son, he died of a heart attack at the age of 42. And then brother Charles eventually remodeled the mansion back into a residence and lived there in the house along with two servants and the illegitimate child of his brother William. Charles, too, became an odd figure as he grew older, developing a morbid fear of germs. His obsessive-compulsive behavior included wearing gloves at all times to avoid bacteria and constantly washing his hands. It was during this time that William's illegitimate child, now in his 30s, died at the mansion. He was buried on the Lemp Cemetery plot with only a small flat marker with the word Lemp. Shortly after the monkey-faced boy's death, Charles became the fourth member of the Lemp family to commit suicide. First, he shot his beloved Doberman Pinscher in the basement of the mansion. Then, climbing the staircase to his room on the second floor, he shot himself. Charles was discovered on May 10th, 1949 by one of his staff still holding a .38 caliber Army Colt revolver in his right hand. Though the dog was shot in the basement, he was found halfway up the stairs. So, of the Lemps, only Edwin Lemp, who had long avoided the life that had turned so tragic for him and the rest of his family, remained. He was known as a quiet, reclusive man who had walked away from the Lemp Brewery in 1913 to live a peaceful life on a secluded estate in Kirkwood, Missouri. Edwin passed away quietly of natural causes at the age of 90 in 1970. According to Edwin's last wishes, his butler burned all of the paintings that the Lemps had collected throughout his lifetime, as well as priceless Lemp family documents and artifacts. These irreplaceable pieces of history vanished in the smoke of the blazing bonfire. The Lemp family line died out with him and his family resting place, and now can be found in the beautiful Bellefontaine Cemetery. After the death of Charles Lemp, the mansion was sold and turned into a boarding house. Along with the nearby neighborhood, the buildings began to deteriorate, which is why I said, like, this is not a place where people just go and chill out now. Like, it's a very, like, not great neighborhood. A lot of people get murdered in East St. Louis especially. But now it's like the buildings are quite deteriorated. And now this is to the point where this is now where the hauntings seem like it begins. So, residents complained of ghostly knocks and phantom footsteps being heard throughout the house. As these stories spread, the tenants were hard to find for the boarding house and continued to decline to a near flop house status. However, in 1975, the old mansion was saved when Dick Pointer and his family purchased it. Immediately, they began to renovate the building to turn it into a restaurant and inn. Workers within the house often told stories of apparitions, strange sounds, vanishing tools, and the feeling of being watched. Frightened by the hauntings, many would leave the job site and never return. Since the restaurant opened, staff members have reported several strange experiences again and again. Apparitions appear and then quickly vanish, and voices and sounds come from nowhere. The glasses will lift often off the bar, flying through the air by themselves. On other occasions, the doors are said to lock and unlock by themselves. Lights inexplicably turn on and off on their own free will, and the piano bar often plays when no one is near. Said to be haunted by several members of the Lemp family, there are 3 areas of the old mansion that have the most activity: the stairway, the attic, and what the staff refers to as the gates of hell in the basement. It is this area of the basement that used to be the entrances to the caves running below the mansion and the brewery. The attic is said to be haunted by William Jr.'s illegitimate son, referred to only as the monkey-faced boy. This poor soul, born with Down syndrome, spent his entire life locked in the attic of the Lemp Mansion. Strange occurrences are often witnessed on this 3rd floor level of the mansion. The face of the boy is regularly seen from the street, peeking from the small windows of the mansion. Ghost investigators have often left toys in the middle of the room, drawing a circle around them to see if objects have been moved. Consistently, when they return the next day, they found that the toys are in another location. Which is interesting because also Zach Bagans from the Ghost Adventures crew has also been to this location as well, and they had quite an active experience. Regardless if you believe that that show is real or not, they did obtain, according to them, some very high-level documentation. Fast forwarding here, in the downstairs women's bathroom, which was once William Jr.'s personal domain and held the first freestanding shower in St. Louis, mind you, many women have reported a man peeking over the stall. One of which such occasion, a woman emerged from the bathroom, returning to the bar, and stated to the 2 men she was there with, "I hope you got an eyeful." However, the 2 men quickly denied ever having left the bar, for which the bartender verified. This ghost is said to be that of the womanizing William Jr. In William Lemp Sr.'s room, guests have often reported hearing someone running up the stairs and kicking the door. When William Lemp killed himself, William Jr. was known to have run up the stairs to his father's room, finding it locked, and began to kick in the door to get to his father. Several years ago, a part-time tour guide reported hearing the sounds of horses outside the room where William Lemp Sr. had kept his office. However, when the tour guide looked through the window, nothing was there. This area, north of Mansion, now used as a parking lot, was once utilized as tethering lot for horses. The mansion has been featured in a number of magazines, articles, and newspapers, and now that attracts ghost hunters from across the country. Today it features a bed and breakfast with rooms restored to period style, a restaurant featuring fine dining, and mystery dinner theater. Tours are also available at the mansion. So I want to read to you guys a couple of people's encounters that they've had at the Lemp Mansion, which is very interesting. So on Saturday, October 9th, 2004, Kathy Weisner and Amy Stark visited the Lemp Mansion along with St. Louis historian Joe Gibbons. Joe has spent many years researching the Lemp Mansion and often gives tours of the inn with the permission and cooperation of the owners. Meeting up with Joe at the bar, we settled in for a bit, pulling the couple of loggers and chatting it up with Joe. After Joe very kindly introduced us to Patty Pointer, he began to show Amy and I around the mansion. As Joe described in intricate detail the history of the Lemp Mansion, the land on which the mansion stands, and many strange occurrences that haunted buildings, our tour took on new members. By the time we reached the attic, there must have been more than 20 of us. While we were there on tour, several strange events occurred. The first was when we were standing in the darkened attic. As Joe described the monkey-faced boy, I began snapping pictures in the darkened room. Soon I was approached by a woman who had joined our unofficial tour, and she wanted to know if my shadow would appear on the wall when I took a picture. To this I responded no, because the flash is in front of me. Perplexed, she continued that I took one picture in the attic, that she saw the distinct shadow of a person against the wall. I quickly scrolled back through my digital images to see if the shadow appeared, but there was nothing. Even stranger, another member of the group reported hearing a very faint voice of a child saying over there, "Help me, help me." As we began to make our way back down the stairs and passed by William Lemp Sr.'s room, Amy pulled me aside because the door was standing wide open. With the key in the door, not going in, we just wanted to peek. We continued our journey down the hall when an alarm was raised by one of our guests' rooms. When they had arrived back from dinner, they found the door was wide open and they were looking for a manager. However, there was no key in the door when they arrived. A manager quickly responded, it was impossible that there had been a key in the door, as there was only 2 keys to that room. One was in the hand of the guest and the other was in the hand of the manager. So who opened the door and where was the key that we saw when we passed? Later, several members of the group would describe having passed a man in the hallway holding a key in his hand and described him as acting irritated with the large group moving through the hallway. Described as a pale, older man and wearing a white shirt and black pants. No one thought anything of it at the time, believing him to be a member of the staff. However, we would find that there was no such gentleman working or staying at the mansion that night that would meet that description. Though no harm was done, nothing was disturbed in the guest's room. The whole experience was just very bizarre. Next, everyone congregated around Charles Lemp's room. The guests staying in the room kindly allowed us to enter to look around. Both Amy and I have sensed the heaviness in the bedroom area, but this was not the room that Charles shot himself in. Rather, it was the parlor area. One of the women who had joined our group told the story of how she had been married in the mansion a year earlier and had carefully laid her dress and other items on the bed. She turned away for a moment, but then she turned back. All of the items were scattered. Outside of Charles' room, one member of the group reported smelling cigar smoke. On the first level of the mansion, the dining room to the left of the entryway once served at William Lemp II's office, and this is where he had killed himself. In the corner of the room was his desk, where he sat his gun in his final moments. The temperature in this corner was considerably colder than the rest of this room. on the wall is the painted portrait of Lillian Lemp, the lavender lady. One group member reported having smelled a distinct aroma of lavender when passing by her portrait. So yeah, there's like tons and tons of, I mean, just different paranormal experiences. I mean, I'm pretty sure you could Google them online and just see the amount of attraction that the Lemp Mansion has gained over the years, and it's one of my favorite stories. I mean, it's very tragic. It just seems like all of them really struggle with mental illness and could be contributing to paranormal experiences. I have physically been there and I have been scratched before, so excuse me, I can tell that there is definitely something going on there. I hope to go have dinner there someday though. I think it would be really cool to sit, eat, and, you know, learn about the Lemp Mansion history more in person. I wanted to make this podcast more for this episode, more of a historical rather than scary, because I want people to have the real understanding of why things happen the way they do, or how things went down with historical accuracy, rather so much than a scare factor. However, I love when we hear about people's histories of having been there or their experiences, and it makes you really question, were they just struggling with mental illness and then they died, or was there something influencing them within the house? The basement also has limestone foundation, as do most of the old homes here in the United States, and limestone is known to hold a lot of negative energy, and just energy in general that could be causing the hauntings to be so pronounced in the house. But anyways, I want to thank you guys so much for watching today's episode, and please, like I said, please subscribe and let me know down in the comments what you thought of this episode, and I can't wait to see you guys on the next one. Take care.